Hello, everybody. Hi. Welcome back to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I am your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Good to see ya. It's been a hot minute. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who came out of the woodwork to give support and empathy. It is fascinating to watch this small family grow. You guys are very loyal and incredibly polite and sincere. And I can't thank you enough. So yes, thank you. And at risk of saying something trivial, I will just leave it at that. So I'm feeling a little bit rusty getting back into it, but let's talk about Arthur Rimbaud. This is a biography of Rimbaud published by the Oxford historian Robb around the year 2000. If you've heard of Rimbaud before, you've probably heard all sorts of things. Good, bad, hideous, shocking, bizarre, hysterical, or maybe you've never heard of him at all. Or, even worse, you were forced to read him in some sort of institution, where even the most vicious artists by some sort of environmental proxy are reduced to the most mind-numbing sort of bland academic pap. Arthur Rimbaud might be the most notorious poet in history. Probably had more influence on 20th century poetry than any other. Infamous doesn't even begin to describe his notoriety, and genius doesn't do his work justice. Impossible is a fairly accurate description. He was, at the time, a one-man alternative to the world of poetry. He wrote fearsome, exotic, delirious, and violent poetry when he was still just a teenager. He lived a completely debaucherous and radically impoverished lifestyle, and then he stopped writing poetry at the ripe old age of 21 and became an arms dealer in Africa. He's been accused of being many things, and was some of them: a homosexual, a prostitute, a criminal, a mercenary, a god, a demon. Rimbaud was raised in a small provincial French town by a mother who was cold as ice, although he would maintain this strange sort of love-hate relationship that seemed very close with her for the rest of his life. In school, he was quickly recognized as a prodigy with this sort of quiet demeanor, but this really strange sense of humor. He read voraciously, basically anything of interest that he could get his hands on. He would borrow books from the local bookshop that would get shipments in from Paris, and then he got too afraid that he was going to get caught when he was returning them, so he ended up just stealing them. When he was a young teenager, he felt stifled under his mother, who he named the Mouth of Darkness in his writings, and was desperate to get out. So he began corresponding with one of the only poets at the time from Paris that he thought was worth a damn, a man named Paul Verlaine. So, lying about his age, he sends Verlaine all of these compliments and several of his own poems, and even adding a few years to his age, Verlaine realizes that he's corresponding with a very enviable talent. So after Rimbaud has several unsuccessful attempts to get out of Dodge, including one where he's arrested in the other city because he couldn't pay for his ticket, he is invited to Paris by Verlaine. Verlaine invites him to his house, which he shares with his wife, who is like 16, and his young son. Verlaine is like 27. Rimbaud is about 16, almost 17. If Verlaine only knew what was about to arrive on his doorstep, he probably would have killed himself. Here starts one of history's greatest anti-romances between Paul Verlaine and Arthur Rimbaud. Verlaine and his wife are completely surprised by Rimbaud, first because he's not 20 years old, he's actually 16. He is indeed the author of these poems, and he's a complete fucking mess. He's a loud, ill-mannered, arrogant, dirty, foul-mouthed punk who shovels food into his face and steals shit, hoping to sell it back to people for some quick cash. He has no fucking scruples. He's a crusty little urchin bastard. Rimbaud succeeds in actually seducing Paul Verlaine, again, 10 years his senior, stealing him away, also at the same time using him as a sugar daddy, effectively destroying his marriage several times over, embarrassing the families, driving him insane, and having a stupendous amount of fun while doing so. It should be mentioned that before Rimbaud came along for the 2 years prior to that event, Verlaine had been trying to save himself from his former life by marrying this young girl. This was evident as soon as several of his friends came to horrible fates as soon as he got married. One of them joined the army and was shot and killed a few months later, and another one simply put a gun in his mouth and Verlaine found him. He had some passionate loves before all of this, and he essentially blamed his wife for these deaths. And although Verlaine fought bravely in the war, there was this point where things started to kind of crack and he would begin to have these spells of outrageous violence, often directed towards his wife and child. Now with Rimbaud, everything just seemed to be magnified, which is completely appropriate. Everything with Rimbaud is just pushed to the limits, and past. Verlaine, fueled by copious amounts of absinthe, seems to be so head over heels obsessed with Rimbaud that he sacrifices almost all autonomy. He must follow him as far as Rimbaud is willing to go. And Rimbaud is hell-bent on going all the way, deranging himself on purpose, imbibing every poison in order to see that which cannot be seen, and also denouncing personal hygiene and avoiding any kind of careerism at all costs. As Verlaine put it in a letter later on, "He's a demon, you know. He isn't a man." So they run away to London and to Brussels, where they continue these violent games and this bizarre sort of romance. I mean, Rimbaud would stab people for fun in bars in Paris, so things just kind of like escalated from there. He and Verlaine would wrap towels around knives like so that just the edge was sticking out, and then they would like fight each other shirtless in their apartment. They would write poetry, and they would fight, and they would argue, and they would rile each other up in this exhaustingly creative fervor. It was the most productively self-destructive relationship I have ever read about. Who knows what never got written down. In the end, they were on again, off again, and it was all these torrid events came to a head, and it ended up with like Verlaine shooting Arthur Rimbaud in the wrist, and that was the end of it. That's when Rimbaud left for good, and he went back to his mother's for a few months, and he wrote his most famous work, A Season in Hell. And then he stopped writing poetry by the age of 21. And then he took off for many other countries, all over the place, eventually ending up in East Africa, as the book notes. He had a working knowledge of 5 languages, had seen more sights and experienced more interesting intoxications than an English lord on the Grand Tour, published a book, A Season in Hell, published actually by his mother, of all people, who was the last person you would expect to support his work, but she did it. He's been arrested in 3 countries and repatriated from 3 others. The most he had ever earned from his writing had been a free subscription to a magazine, but he had left behind a body of work that would one day open up new regions of the mind to poetic explorers, and not just poets. I mean, rock stars, filmmakers, everybody of the avant-garde of the 20th century, the surrealists, of course, everybody. Patti Smith, I'm sure, David Bowie, I'm sure, fucking everybody was influenced by Rimbaud. He had begged, been to jail, committed approximately 12 imprisonable offenses with impunity, survived war, revolution, illness, a gunshot wound, his own family, and the Cape of Good Hope. He had been on intimate terms with some of the most remarkable writers and political thinkers of the age. The Arthur Rimbaud who eventually washed up on the shores of East Africa was not a helpless innocent. So what the hell have you done with your life? So suggested reading would be obviously, I should mention that might be half of the book, maybe half. I mean, like the rest of it takes place in Africa, and I mean this review would be far too long, and I would give away all the most interesting details. I mean, you gotta read it. It's one of the greatest stories ever told. It's really impossible, and he died before the age of 40. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It just gets better from there. It's amazing. It's profound. It's beautiful. It's hideous. It's better than food. So, suggested reading, of course, I mean, like, I want to go into this poem. Maybe I'll just review them later. I don't even know. I mean, like, the biography, the story, first off, is fascinating. The poetry is exceptional. I'm not even going to go and read from it, but you should read A Season in Hell, The Batterie, The Drunken Boat, The Illuminations. Start off with A Season in Hell. Yeah, and I'll review that down the line too, probably. It'll be like Rimbaud Part 2. Reading them is like watching the mind fall apart in the face of its own insights and be reborn, delirious, and raving. And there's a lot more to say on the subject, actually, but this review's gone on long enough as it is. So if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and help me out with a little bit of cash. It really buys me more time. That's all it is. All the financial donations do is it just buys me time. It's a pure capitalistic exchange so that I have time to give to you so you can read more books. And thank you so much again for all of the kind words regarding Dad. So, really appreciate it, guys. So please remember what John Waters said. If you go home with someone and they happen to be a genius poet, don't fuck them. It will end badly. All right, maybe just once or twice. What can it hurt? If you go home with somebody and they don't have books, don't fuck them. Bye.